let's welcome our speakers. TJ, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the invite. I'm TJ Petrie. I'm the founder and CEO of South Left. We are a front-end design and development agency specializing in advanced design systems and AI-supported code generation. I'm located in New Orleans.
I love it. I also added TJ's LinkedIn profile if you would like to learn about all the things about MCPs. TJ is posting a lot, so highly recommend it. Devana, would you like to go next?
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I am Devana May, the creator of GPT, where we build brands of global influence. I am a lawyer turned global entrepreneur. I'm currently in Southeast Asia completing a sabbatical. And my purpose here today is to help entrepreneurs elevate their brilliance through the extension of AI. And I am a non-technical person who has found incredible value, ease, and utility in the accessibility of AI. And so I'm extremely excited to share what I know and to actually learn a lot from this panel today. So thank you so much for having me.
Love it. Alex, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Wilson. I am the Design System Engineering Manager at T. Rowe Price. Been there since the beginning of our design system, and I've seen it grow. And we've been really getting into the AI space, especially in this last year, introducing a lot of internal tooling and tooling for our community that I'm really excited to share with the group today. I've also included below a link to a post that I recently made that kind of dives a bit deeper into what I'm going to be discussing today as part of this panel. So excited to share more.
Love it. And my name is Farid. I'm going to host the session today. So if you would like to learn more about design systems, we are doing all these open panel sessions every Thursday. The next one, we will be talking about measuring design system impact. Pretty interesting discussion. Okay, so the goal for this session for today is talk about what AI-ready design system means with some practical insights. And let's start a discussion what it means to be AI-ready. So Devana, would you like to start the discussion, maybe share from your perspective what it means for you to be AI ready?
Yes, I love that question because as a person who does not come from a technical background, but a person who's extremely talented, has a lot of creative ideas, I've held on some creative projects for years until AI was accessible on a mass level. So now I sit in a place where my goal is figuring out which tools are right for me and my client, which tools can help us save money while scaling, which have the lowest risk and the lowest barrier to entry, and how can creators explore their creativity and their expressions in a way that's not costly, in a way that they don't have to commit, in a way that they don't have to sign up for these contracts that they don't understand, but most importantly, how can they simply express themselves in ways that have never been possible before? And then ultimately converting their knowledge into assets. So that's what I believe AI is helping us do. It's helping us to connect with our brilliance and really express it in ways that haven't been possible before.
Love it, love it. Great. TJ, what is your definition?
Definition of AI-ready design systems?
Yes.
Specifically within the realm of design systems, AI-ready design systems to us comes with context. And so we've stressed the word context a lot. Context is having a big year. Last year, prompting was the word of the year, but I feel like context, it's just, I haven't said that word as much as I've ever had in my life. But when I say context, I mean, it's the stuff that AI understands and can absorb at better jobs at creating and generating responses or generating whatever the output, whatever the intended output should be. In terms of design systems, context is typically something that is best served up front, and then we can go into the whole context-based design systems approach. But a lot of that stuff usually ends up happening in the Figma area or whatever design program, 10-pod Figma, where you can store that context, and then ideally if everything is spelled out correctly, then the layer below it kind of cascade, and that context just makes things smarter and better and produces higher fidelity results on that path.
Love it. Alex, would you like to add?
Yeah, so I'll add a different perspective to that as well. So I agree with what was said so far. I think there's AI readiness in terms of a personal adoption, like a team level adoption. There's AI readiness of the actual design system assets itself. So at a team organizational level, there's got to be a way to feel more comfortable with the AI tools around you. And like TJ said, that can be helped out with better context. So context about standards, the way that you work, that can help shape the output from these tools in a way that it feels more comfortable with using the output in your projects. If it were to give you something that is not aligned with your standards, then it might actually cause you more work than if you were to write that little piece of code yourself. Just depends on the case. So then there's that, but then there's also how do you make a design system AI ready? When we're focusing on that area, I think it's about turning what you have within your design system code base or within your design assets into data or structured data. So that way models can ingest that information as context and just figuring out new ways of figuring that out for your own design system, whether that be to turn your components API into JSON or maybe to turn your change log into something that's a little bit more digestible or parsable by something that ends up going into a model. So that way you can understand the changes of your design system. So it's thinking about all these different aspects, and it touches a lot of different areas. So it'll be good to dive a little bit more deep into this as we go forward.
Love it, love it. This is great. So we captured a couple interesting thoughts here that, as Davona mentioned, creating your own GPTs, right? Creating your own agents. TJ, I like your comment about the context. Agentic workflows is the future thing that people might have. So we're going to talk about the way how you can create design system agent, but we can also think about having those kind of things working as agentic workflows in the future. Having internal MCPs is a checkpoint. If you have your own internal MCP and if you started unifying data across your organization, that are the first signs of being AI ready. If you have the data, if you have the guidelines as a context, right, you can start creating those agents and get the value out of it. And Alex, I really like your point around moving those kind of guidelines that you have into agent so that the agent will able to do some work and answer some of your questions about the changelog, the guidelines and API. And we will talk about that in a second as well. The differences between maybe doing the vector database or just having AI tool calls to go and take a look into specific things and pull the up-to-date data. Let me also go through some of the comments here. Casey mentioned that the token structure and component library combined with contextual documentation are needed for AI to consume. Love it. So let's also maybe start building the building blocks, the data blocks that are important for the design system, right? So if anyone can help me and take this round shapes and just start adding the core data sources or maybe data points that might be interesting, because here Casey mentioned the component library, but in which format? What exactly is needed? Is it a component API props or is it more guidelines? So let's do that in parallel and we will come back on that in a second. Nicholas mentioned build the best structured information base that is AI analysis. Metadata per components and variants, design tokens and descriptions, documentation on the markdown. Natalia also shared your system has built with context and intent. This is interesting. Maybe the talking about the intentions might be the starting point, because that will help you to understand, okay, here are the user intentions and what kind of queries people might ask. So what kind of data you will need to have as a part of your MCP to answer those questions. So that might be something interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them within the answer and questions panel here in the FigJam, and feel free to do that also in the YouTube comments. I will add a couple things here. And let's start with the first topic, and we will dive into more practical stuff. The core solutions on the market. Talk to your design system. That might be the first interesting part. And as Natalia mentioned, we can start with the intentions and we can start also with the data points. But TJ, would you like to share maybe your perspective on the current solutions on the market, maybe some links or examples?
Sure. Yeah. So the current solutions on the market for helping out with context and intent. So I think the obvious one is Figma MCP. That's probably the most popular one that's out there right now. That I think that's the most easily approachable and gets the most bang for your buck for the the amount of work that it does. It's one of the earlier ones that we've adopted in our workflows, and it really helped advance us from where we were before when we were trying different methods of code generation to Figma MCP does amazing work. It doesn't get all of the metadata, and it doesn't get things like component description, which is typically where we like to put things like user intent and purpose for components. It does get enough to inform the AI client about the component, the variables associated with it, the properties associated with it. And it does a really decent job of creating it pretty close to, depending on the complexity of the component, pretty close to production ready component. Human intervention needs to happen at every step of the way here. And no way am I supporting just, hey, make this component and then ship it workflows. That's probably the biggest tool that I think everyone's probably heard of. And then maybe later on, when we get into some of the more advanced topics, we can talk about some of the customized tooling that we use.
Love it. Can we dive deeper into the first user intention, understanding the design system guidelines? And maybe we can also brainstorm on that, what kind of main intentions are when it comes to design system, right? From your perspective, what kind of main queries people might ask when it comes to design system? Alex, you mentioned the changelog might be interesting, the component API structure might be interesting. What kind of data points are helpful? And also, it's important not to add a lot of things because there will be some issues with the performance. But can you please share a little bit more on that and maybe how you've created your own design system MCP? And TJ, I know that you have open source solutions for that as well. If you could share a link, that would be great.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I'll touch on a few things here. When it comes to design system guidelines, it's going to differ between each individual and each team, what they actually need, and also the case that they're in at that moment in time. When we started building out our design system MCP server, I ended up having a conversation with somebody, and they noticed that when I was discussing how we could actually migrate them from one version of our design system to another, it also let them know what was the difference between the version they were on and that major version. And they said, oh, great. It has all that detail. I said, we have the changelog. I said, it doesn't really have all the information. It's a little bit hard to look through. And that really made me think about how can we expand the MCP server to really get into the detail of the changes between the different versions. I mentioned the changelog there. We've done a lot with our changelog to make sure that it's not only structured in the markdown file, but it's also actually in a JSON format that could be consumed by the MCP server. So there's that. There's also obviously component APIs. People are interested in how does a component work, but also maybe how does that component work now versus how did it work on the version that they are on currently. That is something that I think is really interesting about design system MCP servers that we could get into, because not every MCP server that people are creating look back in a historical context, but it's more about the what's available right now. And I feel that that provides a lot of value in itself. So there's a lot that you can get out of MCP server as long as you are able to provide the data. We built ours based on JSON that we publish out whenever we do a new deployment. And so that way it is tied to each of the different versions that we have available. And we don't have a vector database yet. Maybe we'll get to that at one point. But our approach to get there efficiently at this time is to leverage the JSON files that are available in the cloud that we publish, and then retrieve them, pull them in, and then parse and then return the right response based on the request and the tool being called. At the end of the day, an MCP server is just an API that you're calling that returns some data. It's not overly hard to build. It's a matter of actually refining that data and making that data the best it possibly can be. So there's a lot there. Would love to hear other perspectives on this, but that's kind of my first whack at it.
Love it. TJ, can we talk about the data points? I feel like there are multiple levels of complexity, right? The first MVP version that people can have is just to make short text format and just add it into the context of the AI, so that when there will be OpenAI GPT-4o, for example, you can just put that into the context. It will be very short. You will not be able to add a lot of things, but at least something. The second one is the vector base. People call it RAG platforms, right? But can you tell me more about what is your take on the the complexities of data points that people can start thinking of when it comes to design system MCP.
Yeah, let's say in the example of transitioning a component into a developed React component, you could start with a very one-shot prompt where you just, like if you're using the local MCP, then you can just say, build the component that I'm focused on. Or if you're using the remote MCP, you could say, here's the canonical link to the frame that I want you to build it. And then it'll do something. It probably won't get it to the fidelity that it is on the Figma side of things. And then the next step would, let's get a little more detailed. So instead of just providing the URL to the component, you give it a little bit more context. So this is where context, and the more it's like the more you put in, the better the output's going to be. So if you provide it things like build this avatar component or whatever it is that you're looking to build, and then you say reference these 2 or 3 other sibling components that are within the same directory that share some code stylings and some reference material that the AI can learn from to know how it should be coding this avatar component, then you're already giving it a little bit more context, because the AI client already has contextual awareness of your code base anyway. So it should know the tech stack that it's working with, whether it's React, whether it's SCSS or style components or whatever that is. And within that prompt, you can give it directory paths and say, I want you to generate this component that has this file structure in this named directory. I want you to look in this directory for the proper token files that are done as CSS custom properties. And then I want you to reference these 3 similar, maybe it's a badge or something, 3 similar components. And so that's all just in one prompt without any kind of additional things that are happening with it. And then the next level would be adding some additional MCP tools on it. So adding some supporting agents. So what we'll do is, what we were doing before is when we were running the Figma MCP, we had a couple of sub agents that would check the fidelity of what the MCP was outputting. So in the prompt, it would still put, this is where I want the file to be generated. These are the tokens. This is the directory path of the tokens, and just some loose expectations. But then we would have a couple of other agents that would run beneath that to check for accessibility, to check for code cleanliness, to check for just general good housekeeping when it comes to how the rest of our components have been developed. So that would be more of the advanced piece of it that helps with that, just ensuring that the output without any human intervention is as close to production ready as you can get it. Then the context engineering piece happens. That's the more manual human involvement.
I would love to add to that, to the context portion of the conversation, if that's all right. Um,
Mhm.
I am very pro humans being the best source of information, emphasizing concepts like empathy, ethics, and bias, and inclusivity and legality. And they don't want it to sound vanilla, and they don't want it to hallucinate. So it's all in the training, the way you train your AI in a way that feels authentic. That's not only authentic to you, but authentic to the user, to the people who are on the end, to the intended audience. The more you interact with it, the more you can develop its voice, its tone, its output. You can train it to speak to you in a way that resonates with you. So I think training from the front end and the back end are both ways to help get that content that you want.
I think you've made some great comments there, and bringing it to some of what we've been also talking about with the MCP server. And I also saw a comment about custom versus a vendor solution. Vendor solutions can be great. They are off the shelf. They're ready for you. But there is benefit at times to create your own MCP server. We chose to do that. I still stand by that decision because of also what you just mentioned about shaping how the response is sent back to the client. You can create any number of tools that you want if it's your own product. And on top of that, you can add additional content to the data that you're also sending back that helps shape the way that that response is made. So as an example, we leverage web components as part of our design system, but we have React applications. We have React applications at the firm. Now, in order to cater to those React applications, especially those that are on older versions that don't support web components in their entirety, we needed to create React wrappers for our components. Now, we have the translation or descriptors of how it goes from the web component to the React component syntax written as a markdown file. That markdown file is then shipped with the MCP server response. So then when you say, create a React beacon is our design system name, create a React beacon button, It doesn't use the web
Mhm.
component syntax. It sends back the web component data. And then on top of that, it also it transforms it into the React syntax because it has the rules of how to make it a React wrapped version of our component using the same API. But could we do that if it was a vendor tool? Probably not, because we wouldn't have that flexibility. But you do have the maintenance of the tool. So there's pros and cons, but that connects what you were saying, Devana, with what we're also describing here with some of the design system MCP tools and how we could build those out.
That can actually, there's general knowledge stuff that you'll be gathering from AI, and then there's the customized knowledge that you want to feed it from whatever discipline or channel industry that you might work within. In your world, a custom GPT is probably similar to us creating custom MCPs for when speaking in like the technical vernacular. So we have something that's very similar to what you're talking about called the Design Systems Assistant MCP. We reached a point with a lot of the tools that we were trying to develop where general knowledge AI wasn't giving us what we needed, at least at the level of detail and granularity that we needed. So in the non-technical term, you would probably create something like a custom GPT and you would fill it with niche best practices, healthcare marketing, or whatever the purpose of that GPT would be. In our instance, we fed it with design systems best practices and stuff that we could get from a lot of niche resources that we found across the web that aren't necessarily hot takes, but things that are ingrained best practices that are widely accepted amongst the community, and then fed the GPT or the vector database full of this content, and then now allowed people to not only access whatever general knowledge AI will return, but also now powered back by the detailed response, the detailed knowledge base that it's filtering through to give you a more amplified, more detailed, unique look at whatever the prompt might be. So I guess the answer to the question would be, to me, it feels like it only makes it better. One of those things, but it's for the design systems assistant one that we created it to be general use so anybody can use it. So it's not company specific, but in your case, if you're creating custom GPTs, not only would you want that best practices level for healthcare industry marketing, but you also might want to create custom GPTs that are for the business that you're looking at too. So there's definitely a correlation there. I think unless you're feeding it with junk, then it's only going to make the general knowledge worse. But ideally, you would be feeding it with good stuff.
Love it, love it. And I feel like this is the important topic that Devana mentioned is how we can iterate. When it comes to building all these MCPs and agents and GPTs, it's important not only create and publish it, but actually iterate and understand how it all actually performs. And this is the last topic here, the evals. And this is the way how you can check what kind of questions people are asking and what is the response from the AI. So you could find some interesting signals. Maybe some people are not using your model in the right way. Maybe they are trying to hack it. But when it comes to internal design system specific, this is not the main issue. The main issue there might be related to the fact that people are asking specific question, but the AI is not able to answer because it doesn't have enough context around that. So this is a good signal for you to start adding more information. Maybe people are interested, as Alex mentioned, on the changelog and adding this changelog into the vector database, or at least as a link, might be helpful to make sure that your agent works properly. Love it. And Brian also had similar question related to the knowledge accessible for other folks to pick up. So everything related to the intellectual property, right? And yeah, this is really good discussions. I brought some more technical stuff when you are creating an agent and agent has internal tool calls as maybe sub MCPs, maybe taking a look into the Jira or taking a look into the Slack. You can, this is more technical, but you can search online. It's called RBAC systems, where it will respect the user's authentication token. There will be some kind of barrier in the experience where people will need to authenticate to unlock specific MCPs within the conversation if you are building your standalone app. But this is the way how you can make sure that the data that people are asking for is only accessible for them. So the Slack or Jira in this place controls the permissions management part. Love it. Okay, let's talk about more practical, how people can quickly, I know that you have open source solution for that. Can you please elaborate how easy, how fast it is for people to build their own MCP design system assistant?
Yeah, Claude Skills, one of the newer features that Claude's rolled out, actually has a skill to just build your own MCP. So that's an easy kind of low-hanging fruit way to start. And Claude Code, whether it's through Claude Code or Claude Desktop, will build you that skill. And if you don't know what a skill is, it's less of a reliance on AI interpreting, giving you subjective responses. Skills is more of an objective. This is a code that's ran to produce a thing, like resize an image or something like that. They have tools to be able to create. It's one of the tools that actually come out of the box with Claude Skills. So that's an easy way to approach creating your own MCP. We have a lot of custom MCPs that we use for similar to the reasons that Alex was talking about, and similar to the reasons why, Devon, why you create custom GPTs. We also have one particular one that we put out there that's an empty GPT, and it uses Cloudflare workers. So Cloudflare came out with this, let's make an MCP server for you very easily. And it's a React-based system that uses Cloudflare workers, and it's relatively simple to set up. It uses Wrangler as the CLI tool. And then the tool that we created, the service is called Company Docs. And it's really the same infrastructure that powers Design Systems Assistant, except it's got nothing in it. And the purpose is that you can NPM install it inside of your code base, typically something where you would have your Markdown or JSON that's powering the documentation for your design system. You can really use it for anything outside of the design system too, like a handbook or HR or anything like that. Then there's a command that sends those Markdown files to a vector database that you would have set up. And then the command also runs that Wrangler command to produce a remote MCP URL that you can connect to any MCP client. So whether it's Cursor or Claude Desktop or wherever, you can use that custom Markdown that you've pushed to your vector database as part of the MCP sequence to help give that AI that good context in order for it to do whatever it's supposed to do, whether it's generating documentation or helping with code assistance or whatever.
Love it. TJ, you raised a really good point about the skills, right? So we try to group everything based on the user intentions. The first one starts with talking with your design system, right? And we talk about what kind of data points might be helpful and what kind of levels of complexities you can start by just adding very short version of it into the context and just publish your GPT through the OpenAI or creating endpoint within Azure AI Foundry. The second part is related to also where you can get it, right? You mentioned Claude. Within the Claude, you can connect skills, right? This is the documents or in a Markdown file format that you can define what kind of things to follow. You can add tokens, what kind of tokens you have, and other things. And the third thing is the IDs, right? When it comes to Visual Studio Code or Cursor, but the intention is a little bit different, right? So maybe because of the intention, the context that you would like to share is different, right? Here it might be more generic, it might be more specific and more for specific platforms, for specific framework, right? So there will be different databases, the different contexts for React or web components. One of the interesting things, Cursor rules, this is one of the similar things to the Claude skills, where you can define specific things to follow for AI to follow. So when it comes to developing, right, platform where we are working is IDEs. It might be Cursor, Visual Studio Code. And what people can do, another part of it, if we are talking about developing, is using Cursor rules and internal Markdown files that you can just refer within the chat conversation and just say, here's the Markdown file explaining our component, or here's the Markdown Cursor rules explaining how tokens are being implemented. Alex, what do you think about this second intention when it comes to developing and helping engineers to do their work?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting space. Obvious from a developer perspective, you have to throw some rules in there and just get it to shape my output a little bit better. But also from a central governance standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity. We're actively investigating and pursuing a model by which we have an NPX library that holds Markdown files that will auto place them within the right directory structure. And we don't use Claude, but we have Amazon Q and Copilot and some other tools, and it will auto place the files in that folder. And those files will include things, accessibility standards, semantic HTML standards, all of the things that we would want to see out of the output, we can put in those files and they can be shared. And because it's in an NPX package, a script can be run so that way it auto updates, maybe on a post install or something like that folder. And whenever our design system MCP server is then called, and it tries to generate something from that. It will then go and follow those rules and use that as pre-read to make sure the output follows the standards. And this is something that not necessarily the design system team has to dictate, but it could also become something that your larger technical organization helps shape. It could be also something that relates to design. It doesn't have to just be technical documentation. It could be design documentation or content documentation. It's kind of taking the same type of MCP model around context about the design system and more so shaping it around how the output look when it's done being generated. So that's how I see rules really coming into play, but also there's that cool standardization process that you can plug in there too.
Alex, you raised a really interesting point. So I was always thinking about having the Markdown files or cursor rules as a part of the repository, but your distribution approach here is a little bit more advanced, right? You are creating npm package where you have all those files in
Yeah.
place, and then people can just pm install ds guidelines, right? And it will just add those guidelines into the local repository. Is that the way how it works?
Yeah, sometimes these ideas come out of limitations. Constraints build great ideas, and for us, we have the tools that are available to us at the company. And right now, one of the problems is that none of them support the prompt feature of MCP. So you can't they don't help with sharing the prompts from the actual MCP server. So how do you get around that? Well, if you have ability to share the rules, then instead of prompting something, you can have a workflow defined. You can have those standards defined. You can do whatever you need to do to help shape that output. And yeah, it's exactly what you said. You've got a shared model compared to just having it locally within one space or one local repo or within one GitLab deploy repo or push repo.
Love it. I know that ChatCI and CLI registry, they also started doing something similar where you are not only adding components to your registry and also creating some contextual information for AI to use to understand the purpose of the component, but you can also add rules and other documents that will be also coming from the NPX or NPM registries, and you can pull this data. And if you have Markdown files with the guidelines of the components and workflows and cursor rules, you can use that approach. But I believe the challenge with this is the fastest way to start. But the problem is it will be harder for you to get the feedback loop because the conversations are staying with the IDE platform. And if you're using your own MCPs, you can always turn on tracing within the provider to see what kind of questions people are asking to improve the quality of it, right? So within this second model, it is faster, but it's harder to do the evaluations, right?
It can complement each other though, if you use them both. But I agree with you. Like if you were to use rules, then you don't have some of those capabilities. But I would say it's more powerful using them together.
Love it. There is an interesting comment in the chat. For Claude, you can create a plugin marketplace and distribute through NPM. This helps to install really fast. Skills are actually instance specific, so harder to maintain and distribute. I never thought about plugin marketplace in Claude. This is something, if someone could share the plugin marketplace in Claude, is there a way that
like
might be
the
another third
connectors?
option?
I know the connectors area. I'm not familiar with plugin marketplace though.
Let's see.
I like the sound of it.
Love it. Okay, so the second part, right, chatted about different ways how to talk to your design system. There is also another part where we can talk about accelerating work. So TJ, you mentioned the handoff process, right? How you can use Figma MCP to pull the data and do the handoff things much more faster. Would you like to elaborate on that? What kind of other MCPs you use a lot? I can share some of mine if you are talking about the backend systems. Can you please elaborate a little bit on this intention of instead of checking multiple tools?
Yeah, we were primarily Anthropic, Claude, everything, Claude Desktop, Claude Code, Claude API. The top three for when we're doing any kind of development, whether it's debugging, whether it's product development, or whether it's design system development, when we get out of kind of the primitive component style, if we're building higher order components, things that have date time range pickers and data tables and some of those things that we have to build custom that we can't take off the shelf. there's lots of deep thinking that goes into a lot of those. So first, we try to start with more of a spec-driven approach. We like GitHub Spec Kit, so I highly suggest testing that out. Another good one is Agent IO, a lighter weight Spec Kit, but lately we've been using Spec Kit for a lot of the larger, more comprehensive components, and mostly for the logic that's built inside of them. And then the three MCPs that I can't live without, one is Serena for semantic code retrieval and editing tools. The other is Context 7, which provides all up-to-date documentation on third-party code. So it's great if you're using any kind of API. And then the third is sequential thinking. It helps with any decision making, approaches decisions like a human would approach decisions, and then second guesses itself. And it's a beautiful process when you can watch it do the thinking. And then I top it off with Ultra Think. There's the different levels of thinking that can happen within the AI environment. And I like to just add the icing on the cake with the Ultra Think at the end. And that to me gives me like the peace of mind that it's actually going to do the due diligence to do the research and then check itself in order to produce an educated response.
Can you please elaborate on the spec kit? How do you use it? Like, is it mostly for designing component API?
So
What's
even in
the...
dumb components, we still need logic. So if you have to build something like a date time range picker and you don't have the luxury of picking one off the shelf, then date math is hard. So so we usually use something like date functions library. But then once we have the UI down from whatever we can gather from the Figma MCP, there's still a lot of internal workings that needs to happen in order to get it to work correctly. So the spec kit part, we outline, and it's a series of CLI commands that you run, and it brings you, it creates tasks in groups. You can check off tasks, and you go through each one. This is one where you don't want to necessarily do the dangerously keep things going because it might just jump from task to task when you have to go through and there's a series of checks and balances. And it actually, there's 5 agents that are deployed in there, and they do a lot of meticulous testing on the code that it just provided, that it just created. And there's a whole QA agent, there's a engineer agent, there's an orchestration agent, there's a spec, there's a product owner agent. And each of those define all their own roles, and then they go through it, they generate the entire specifications for the component. And then the AI will work with you to go through all of that. So it takes a little bit longer, but it's worth it for some of the more complex components.
Love it. Interesting. There is also one within Infa there you can also, and maybe this is the way you can connect the dots with the spec kit, right? So with the Infa Assistant, you can take a look into specific things. And for example, let me select those elements and say, can you please do the visual snapshot of selected element and tell me what kind of props or specs do I need to define for my component? So with the new way to pull the information about the selected element, it generates this YAML format code that AI understands. And based on that, it can help you to design better API signatures for your components. So it can tell you that, okay, looks like for items, you are using cards. And this is the card types that you can add, like a regular or add a currency card with what kind of props you could define based on the data that is available. So this is the way how you can take a look into your product and also understand what kind of props or design specs for your component might be. And do you know what kind of search bars do we have? Can you please list me? I believe we have a search bar component in place. And you can also start with what kind of components you have. So as you can see here, it pulls the list of the components. And let me take a look. Sorry, it's called search input. Can you show me where exactly it's being used? And with those kind of queries, because it has information about all of your components, it can start showing you the components that you have. And by just selecting that, this is the way how you can see the screenshot, the code capture of the component, and actually locate it in different pages. So for just the search bar, it will tell you that you have 3 different variations of the search bar. Maybe if you would like to do some refactoring, this will be a good insight for you to understand that we have different variations. You can also do that for references or just to capture the actual usage of your components. Love it. We have one last topic about the end user experience, but unfortunately we are out of time. But thank you very much for joining. Let me just do a quick summary of everything that we discussed. We discussed what it means to be AI ready, and I feel the core learning here is to think about your context and evolves, iterate, run, create your first agents, see what kind of questions people are asking, make sure that the quality of your agent will be improved by adding more context, by updating all the instructions that you have. We talk about the core solutions on the market. I believe there are 3, 4 main areas. The first one where you can actually create your own agent, or maybe use someone that is already on the market. There are so many MCPs available. And TJ, you have really good open source that will help people to create their own MCPs as well. With that, this is the most advanced, but the most interesting one because you can actually iterate and take a look what kind of queries people are asking so that you can improve this part. And the second one, we spoke about more specific use cases developing. And instead of just an agent, you can just create markdown files and cursor rules internally within your IDE platform and just provide it with some answers. And the last one is accelerating your work, right? How to use multiple sets of MCPs for specific needs and to get the information that you are looking for. Again, with the main goal is to decrease the contextual load, get the answers faster, and do the work faster. So thank you very much for joining the session. I will highly recommend to follow all the speakers on LinkedIn. And if you still have any questions, feel free to ask them on LinkedIn. I hope it's okay for you, TJ, Alex, and Devona.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.